The night I kissed a stranger at my best friend's engagement party, I told myself it was the champagne. That's the story I repeated for weeks. The flutes kept coming, the string quartet was too loud, and the ballroom lights were deliberately low. The kind of soft gold that makes everyone look like they belong in a painting. I'd had 2 glasses, maybe 3, and when I saw the man in the charcoal suit standing near the garden doors, I thought I was walking toward the person I'd been dating for 4 months. I wasn't. I should back up. My name is Waverly, and at 31 I had what most people would call a good life. I ran my own event planning company out of Chicago. Small but growing, the kind of boutique firm that handled exactly 12 events a year, and handled them beautifully. I had a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park with a balcony I actually used, a best friend named Gemma who kept me honest, and a boyfriend named Patrick Harlow who was, by every measurable standard, a wonderful person. Patrick was a civil engineer. He coached youth soccer on weekends. He remembered the names of my clients and asked about them. When I had panic attacks before big events, which happened more than I'd like to admit, he talked me down with the same patient steadiness he brought to everything. We'd been together since the previous spring, introduced by a mutual friend at a rooftop birthday party, and falling into a relationship with him had felt less like falling and more like stepping onto solid ground, which should have been everything. The night in question was a Saturday in October. My clients, Gemma's older sister Renata and her fiancé Todd, had rented out the Grand Terrace Ballroom downtown for their engagement party, and since I was both their planner and quasi-family, I spent the first 2 hours managing florals and seating adjustments before I finally let myself relax. Patrick was somewhere near the bar. I'd seen him 20 minutes earlier, tall and familiar in his navy suit, laughing at something Todd's father said. The party was loud and warm and full of people I only half recognized, and when I spotted a figure in charcoal near the doors to the garden terrace, same height, same dark hair, same broad shoulders, I didn't think. I just moved. 4 months of greeting Patrick with affection had made it automatic. I crossed the floor, touched his arm to turn him toward me, and pressed a kiss to his jaw, except it wasn't his jaw. The man turned, and the moment I registered his face, every nerve in my body went cold, and then immediately horribly hot. He wasn't Patrick. He was Patrick in sharper definition. The same features recalibrated into something that looked less like warmth and more like precision. Same dark eyes, but where Patrick's carried easy humor, this man's held the kind of stillness that made you feel like you were being assessed. His jaw was harder. His expression didn't scramble into surprise the way it should have. Instead, he looked at me with something that wasn't amusement exactly, but wasn't far from it. "I don't think we've met," he said. I stepped back so fast I nearly knocked over a woman behind me. "I'm so sorry. I thought you were. I saw your suit, and from behind you looked like someone else, like Patrick." My face was on fire. "Patrick Harlow, I'm his? I'm Waverly." Something shifted in his expression. Subtle, quick. "Waverly," he repeated, like he was filing the information somewhere. "I'm so sorry," I said again, which was already 3 sorries too many. Obviously I didn't mean to. It's fine." He held out his hand. "Sutton Harlow, Patrick's brother." I shook it because refusing would have been worse. His grip was firm and he held a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Patrick appeared at my elbow 90 seconds later, fresh drink in hand, his expression shifting between confused and amused. "I see you've met Sutton." "By accident," I said. "She kissed me," Sutton said pleasantly. "By accident." Patrick laughed, which surprised me, and put his arm around my shoulders. "Sutton, be nice. Waverly, I'm sorry. I should have warned you he was coming. He wasn't supposed to be here until tomorrow." "Flights change," Sutton said, his gaze moving back to me with that same unnerving calm. "It's good to finally meet you, Waverly. Patrick talks about you." I didn't know what to do with that. I smiled, said something appropriately polite, and spent the next hour actively avoiding looking at Sutton Harlow. It didn't entirely work. He was across the room for most of the night, quiet in a way his brother wasn't, watching the party with a detached observation that felt completely at home in his face. He wasn't unfriendly. He spoke to people when they approached him. He listened more than he talked, but there was a quality to his attention that I couldn't quite name, like he was collecting information rather than enjoying himself. Patrick told me that night in the Uber home that Sutton ran their family's private equity firm. I thought your family was in commercial real estate, I said. Dad started in real estate. Sutton took it in a different direction about 6 years ago. Patrick stretched his legs into the footwell. He's good at it. Genuinely good, but it changed him. Changed him how? Patrick was quiet for a moment. He used to be more like me. Easier. He's still a good person. I don't want you to think he isn't, but the job requires a certain kind of hardness, I think. He makes decisions that affect a lot of people, and he's had to get comfortable with that. I stared out the window at the streaked city lights. He seemed fine. He was on his best behavior. Patrick glanced over. He's intense, Waverly. I want you to know that going in, 'cause my parents are already talking about Thanksgiving, and if he's in town. It's fine, I said. But I spent the rest of the drive thinking about the way Sutton Harlow had looked at me when I'd realized my mistake. Not embarrassed on my behalf. Not performatively polite. Just watching. Like he'd found something worth paying attention to. I told myself it was nothing. Gemma heard the story 2 days later over lunch at our usual place on Halstead and immediately put down her fork. You kissed his brother. By accident. In the dark. From the back they're nearly identical. But you kissed him. On the jaw. It barely counted. Waverly. She leaned forward. How did it feel? Like I wanted to dissolve into the floor. That's not what I'm asking. I knew exactly what she was asking, and I didn't want to answer it, which was itself an answer. Because the truth was that the 2 seconds before I realized my mistake had felt completely normal, and the 2 seconds after had felt like something being rearranged inside my chest, and I'd spent 48 hours pretending that meant nothing. Patrick is wonderful, I said. He is, Gemma agreed. So is spinach. That doesn't mean you want to date it. That metaphor doesn't hold up. Neither does the face you're making right now. She picked her fork back up. Just be careful, okay? Brothers are complicated. I told her she was projecting. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks later. Patrick's family lived in Lake Forest. Old money made comfortable rather than showy. The kind of house with good bones and better manners. His mother, Linda, greeted me at the door with genuine warmth and the kind of hug that smelled like cinnamon and something baking. His father, Richard, shook my hand and told me Patrick had spoken highly of me, which I appreciated more than I could say, because Patrick wasn't a man who spoke highly of things unless he meant it. Sutton arrived 40 minutes after we did. I heard him before I saw him, his voice in the entryway, low and even, talking to Richard about something market-related. Then he was in the doorway of the living room, still in his coat, scanning the room with that efficient sweep I now recognized as characteristic. His eyes found me immediately. Waverly, a single word, no performance, no pointed acknowledgement of our last meeting, just my name like he'd expected to see me there. Sutton. I matched his tone. How was the drive from the city? Predictable. He handed his coat to Patrick, who appeared at his elbow. You've redecorated, he said to his mother, who beamed and launched into an explanation of the new dining room wallpaper. Thanksgiving dinner at the Harlows was warm and chaotic in the best way. Linda producing dish after dish, Richard leading them through a family tradition of saying one thing they were grateful for, Patrick squeezing my hand under the table. Sutton sat across from me, as he had at the engagement party, and contributed to the conversation in carefully measured portions, smart observations, occasional dry humor that caught me off guard. At one point, Linda mentioned a nonprofit fundraiser she was chairing in December and asked if I'd consider helping with the event planning. She's the best in the city, Patrick said immediately. Second best, I said. But I'd love to help. Modest, Sutton said. I looked over. He was watching me with that same unreadable focus. Realistic, I said. There's a firm on the Gold Coast that does bigger events than mine. I'm better at the ones that matter more to the client than the guest count. Which is worth more, he said, not a question. Usually. Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. Across the table, Patrick was talking to his mother and didn't notice the exchange. After dinner, while Richard and Patrick did dishes, and Linda showed me photos from a recent trip to Portugal, Sutton poured himself a drink in the kitchen doorway. I found myself standing near him, on the way to refill my water glass. You planning to do this every time we're in the same room? He asked, not looking at me. Do what? Avoid looking at me and then end up next to me anyway. My face went warm. I've been making conversation with your family. You have. He finally turned. and the kitchen light was bright enough that I could see the detail in his expression. Genuinely curious, not unkind. You're good at it. You read people fast. Figured out what each person in that room needed from the conversation within about 5 minutes. It's my job. It's more than your job. He tilted his head slightly. Patrick said, you studied architecture before you pivoted to event planning. I was surprised as he knew that. Structural engineering, actually. 2 years, then I switched. Why? Buildings don't change their minds 2 weeks before opening day. He laughed, an actual laugh, short and surprised. People do. Constantly. I finally met his eyes properly. People are more interesting, though. He held my gaze for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Yes, he said. They are. Patrick appeared in the doorway behind us, and I stepped back, already reaching for the water pitcher. Nothing happened. There was nothing to report. But driving home later, Patrick's hand on the gear shift, I couldn't stop turning the conversation over in my mind. He called me the following Thursday. Sutton, I mean. I didn't know he had my number until my phone lit up with a 312 area code I didn't recognize, and his voice came through when I answered. I have a work event in 2 weeks, he said, without preamble. My assistant usually handles the logistics, but she's on maternity leave, and the person covering has zero experience with this kind of venue. Patrick mentioned your firm. Patrick mentioned me, or you asked Patrick about me? A beat. Both. I should have referred him to someone else. I had 3 events running simultaneously in December, and my bandwidth was already stretched. But I said yes, took down the details, and told myself it was professional courtesy. The event was a client dinner at a private club in the Loop. 50 guests, high expectations, the kind of evening where everything needed to feel effortless. I spent 2 weeks coordinating with the venue, the caterer, a florist I trusted. Sutton was involved more than I expected. He had specific ideas about the table configuration, about the lighting, about what the evening was supposed to accomplish for the people in the room. You're not just feeding them, I told him during one of our calls. You're telling them something about how you operate. Exactly. Something in his voice sharpened with interest. Most people I hire to do this think I'm being difficult about the details. The details are the event. The food gets forgotten. The way the room felt doesn't. Patrick said you were good at this. You keep saying that, because it keeps being accurate. The evening of the event, I stayed through the last course to troubleshoot. Sutton found me near the bar at 9:30, the dinner winding down around us, and said simply, it was exactly right. Coming from him, I knew that wasn't small. You're easy to plan for, I said, which was true. He knew what he wanted. Clear brief, decisive feedback, no last-minute changes. Unlike your other clients? One of them called me at 11 p.m. the night before his wife's birthday dinner to tell me she'd decided she hated the color red. He smiled, a real one this time, fuller than the shadow versions I'd collected at Thanksgiving. It changed his face in a way I wasn't prepared for. Thank you, he said, for the work, and for putting up with me. You weren't difficult. I picked up my clipboard. You just knew what you wanted. He was quiet for a moment. Not always, he said, and the weight of it sat differently than the rest of the conversation. I didn't ask what he meant. I went home and told Gemma about the event, very specifically, not mentioning the last part, and she watched me describe his smile for 30 seconds before pointing out that I hadn't mentioned Patrick once. Patrick had asked me 3 days earlier if I thought we were heading somewhere serious. I'd said yes, and I'd meant it. I'd meant it the way you mean something when you can see its logic clearly, but can't quite make yourself feel the edges of it. Patrick was good to me, genuinely good, the kind of good that came without conditions or performance. He made my life easier in a dozen small ways, and he never made me feel like I was too much or too little. But the but was the problem. Sutton started texting a week after the event, not often, maybe once every few days. Small things. An article about a historic hotel renovation in Chicago that he'd thought I'd find relevant. A question about a venue recommendation for his brother's birthday. A comment on something I'd mentioned in passing during one of our planning calls, proof that he'd retained things I'd assumed he wasn't tracking. I texted back, every time. And I made it professional, or tried to. But there's a quality to Sutton Harlow's attention that makes professionalism feel slightly beside the point. Like he's not interested in the version of you that performs well. He wants the actual one. He's doing it on purpose, Gemma said over the phone one night while I was reorganizing my sample books for no real reason. He's being friendly. Men like Sutton Harlow are not accidentally friendly with their brothers' girlfriends. You've never met him. I've heard you describe him 4 times in 2 weeks, and you've used the word precise 3 of those times, which tells me you find precision attractive. Which tracks, given the engineering background. I'm hanging up. Waverly. Her voice shifted. Patrick is a good man, I know, so figure out why that's starting to sound like a consolation prize. The call I'd been avoiding came on a Sunday afternoon in January. Sutton, not texting, actually calling, which he rarely did. I need to be honest with you about something, he said when I answered. My heart did something inconvenient. Okay. I told Patrick I was interested in you, 2 days ago. I sat down on my couch. You what? It wasn't fair to keep having conversations with you that I wasn't being transparent about. He's my brother. His voice was even, but there was something careful underneath it. I wasn't going to act on it, but he should know. What did he say? That he'd figured it out, that he wasn't surprised. A pause. He said he thought you'd been pulling away for a while. I closed my eyes. The worst part was that I hadn't realized I had been. You don't always notice the gradual dimming of something until someone names it out loud, and you feel the recognition hit you before the defense mechanisms can block it. I haven't done anything, I said. I know you haven't. Neither have I. His voice was careful. I'm not calling to pressure you into anything, Waverly. I'm calling because you deserve to make a real decision with real information. Not a default. A default. Staying because leaving feels complicated. That's not a reason. That's inertia. The observation was too accurate, and I kind of hated him for it. What are you asking me to do? I said. Nothing. I'm telling you what I told my brother, which is that I'm interested in you, and I haven't been able to talk myself out of it. He paused. What you do with that is entirely your choice. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside, the January light was flat and gray, the kind of winter afternoon that makes everything feel suspended. This is going to be complicated, I finally said. Most real things are. We didn't speak again for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, I had 3 conversations with Patrick. The first was the one I'd been dreading, in his apartment on a Tuesday evening, his kitchen table between us. He'd made coffee neither of us was drinking. I need you to be honest with me, he said. Not kind, honest. So I was. Not about Sutton specifically. I was careful about that, because the specifics felt beside the point. But about the truth underneath, that I cared about him deeply and genuinely, that he was one of the better people I knew, that I had never wanted to hurt him, and that somewhere in the last few months I'd started feeling the distance between caring about someone and being in love with them, and I hadn't known how to name it until I'd been forced to. He was quiet for a long time. I knew, he said finally. Not about Sutton, about the rest of it. He turned his coffee mug in his hands. I think I knew for a while, and I was waiting to see if it would change. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it more than I'd meant most things. Don't be. He looked up. I'd rather have this than 6 more months of you performing. I cried in my car, in his parking garage, for 20 minutes after. Not because I'd made the wrong choice. Because the right choice still costs something, and Patrick Harlow was a genuinely good man who deserved someone who didn't have to work at it. The second conversation was with Linda Harlow, which I hadn't expected. She called me the following Saturday to say, simply, that she hoped I was okay, and that she hoped it wasn't the end of our connection to the family. You were good for him, she said. And I think this family might be good for you, in ways that don't require you to be his girlfriend. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just thanked her and told her I meant it. The third conversation was with Sutton, and it wasn't really a conversation at all. I texted him 2 words, your turn. He called in under a minute. He met me that evening at a restaurant in the West Loop I'd suggested. Neutral territory, my choice, which I suspected he'd recognized as deliberate and respected accordingly. He was already there when I arrived, seated at the bar with a glass of wine he hadn't touched, and when I sat down next to him, he didn't rush to fill the silence. I talked to Patrick, I said. I know, he called me. His voice was even. How are you? Honest answer. Unsettled. That's reasonable. I ended something real because of a feeling I can't fully explain yet. I turned to look at him. I need you to understand that if this turns out to be nothing, if I'm wrong about what's between us, I will have caused real damage for no reason. You're right. He met my eyes directly. I can't promise you it works. I can promise you I'm not doing this lightly. His hand moved on the bar, not touching mine, just close. I've been in control of most variables in my life for a long time. You are not a variable I've been able to control, which is either very good or very bad, and I've decided to find out which. That's not exactly romantic, I said. No. The corner of his mouth moved. But it's true. I picked up the wine glass. I'm not an easy person to be with. I'm particular about how things are done, and I have a bad habit of treating my personal life like an event I'm managing. I know. I find it interesting rather than frustrating, which is probably important information. You find everything interesting rather than frustrating. Not everything. Something shifted in his expression. You're different. I didn't ask him to explain that. I had the feeling I already knew. We stayed for 2 hours, talked about things that had nothing to do with Patrick, with the engagement party, with any of the complicated scaffolding around us, about the engineering degree I'd abandoned and occasionally missed, about the firm he'd built from something their father had started and the ways it had reshaped him, not all of them good, about the fact that he played piano badly by choice because, he said, he wanted one thing in his life that he did for pleasure rather than competence. Walking out afterward, on the sidewalk in the cold, he turned to me. I'd like to do this again, he said. Dinner, talking to you. He paused. Dinner is fine too. I looked at him in the yellow glow of the streetlight. This man who looked like Patrick but wasn't, who had the same dark eyes but used them to see different things, who had been patient enough to wait without asking me to wait with him. Okay, I said. Yes. The next 8 months were the most honest relationship I'd been in since my mid-20s. Sutton was not easy the way Patrick had been easy. He pushed back on things. He said exactly what he thought said, with the same precision he brought to everything, and occasionally that was uncomfortable. He expected the real version of me, the one that got anxious before big events, and made lists compulsively, and had opinions about the correct way to load a dishwasher. And not once did he seem to want to soften that down into something more manageable. In return, I saw things in him that I suspected most people didn't. The way he kept a running list in his phone of books his mother mentioned wanting to read, so he could send them without her having to ask. The fact that the badly played piano was a Bosendorfer his grandmother had left him, and that he played it badly, but often, late at night, working through pieces he'd never fully commit to learning. The particular quality of his attention when he was listening to something that mattered. How he went completely still, the way he had when I'd kissed him by mistake at that party, and watched with his whole self. He was also, underneath all the precision and control, occasionally and unexpectedly tender. It caught me off guard the first few times, but I stopped being surprised. Patrick and I navigated the awkwardness slowly, like people learning to walk on a surface that was still settling. At Christmas, Linda had us both at the house and managed the geometry of it with the kind of skill I genuinely respected. Patrick was polite to me, then civil, then eventually almost warm again. It took months. I wasn't sure it would happen at all, and I'm still not sure it's fully repaired. But the Sunday in March when he sat down next to me at his parents' kitchen table and said, I met someone. Her name is Fiona. I think you'd like her. I let myself exhale for the first time in months. Tell me about her, I said. And he did. The hardest part of choosing the difficult thing isn't the moment of the choice. It's the months afterward, when you're living with the consequences and the doubts and the occasional 3 a.m. thought of what if you were wrong. I had plenty of those. I had nights where I lay awake in Sutton's apartment listening to him breathe and wondering whether I'd made a real decision or just a dramatic one. The clarity came in small doses. The Tuesday he drove across the city in a February ice storm, because I'd texted him that I'd lost a major client, and he arrived with takeout and no commentary. The Sunday we spent doing absolutely nothing, reading in parallel, his grandmother's piano getting gently massacred in the background, and I realized I hadn't thought about work for 6 consecutive hours, which was a record. The evening he told me, without prompting, that he'd turned down a deal because it would have relocated jobs from a community he didn't want to affect, and the way he said it so quietly that I almost missed it. You don't talk about that side of it, I said. No, why not? He considered this. Because the people who need to know about it aren't the ones who'd be impressed by it. We moved in together in September. His place was larger and better located, but I insisted on bringing my drafting table, and he had it installed near the window I liked. We argued about the kitchen organization for approximately 3 weeks, and reached a compromise that neither of us was fully satisfied with, which we both agreed was probably healthy. In October, exactly 1 year after the engagement party, his phone rang during dinner. His expression shifted in a way I'd learned to read. Something complicated, related to the family business, the part that wasn't always clean. "I have to take this," he said. "Go." He stood, kissed the top of my head, the small automatic gesture I hadn't noticed becoming a habit until it was one, and walked to the window. I sat at the table and listened to his voice, low and careful and completely in control, and thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the one who'd been performing stability and mistaking it for the real thing. This was harder, more real, less predictable. I didn't want to trade it for anything. When Sutton came back to the table, I was already clearing the dishes. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Managed." He took the stack from my hands. "I've got these. It's fine, Waverly." He turned me to face him, hands on my shoulders, his expression doing that thing it did now, the thing that wasn't performed or strategic but simply true. "Let me." I let him. Which is maybe the real story. The one underneath the story about a mistaken kiss at a party, and 2 brothers who happen to look alike. The one about learning the difference between someone who makes your life easier and someone who makes you more yourself. About choosing the thing that costs something, because the things that cost something are the ones that last. The night I kissed the wrong man, I thought it was the most embarrassing moment of my life. Now I think it was just the beginning of figuring out what I actually wanted, and being brave enough eventually to say so.